to wear every single denim cotton that you're closed with. You're closed with.
Mind, body, and soul. Was a plan when you have no goal. Was a dream when your gray matter really takes toll. Like a feet when your shoes when you have no soles. Rocks the gold, riches no soul. Yeah, told myself that I get better. Yeah, told myself if I keep raining I get better.
Hello, welcome to Kindred Conversations, Living Black in Lowell with me, Maritza Grooms, and
Masada Jones.
Today we have a special guest, Miss Isa Woldeguiorguis. Welcome, Isa. So you are the executive director of the Center for Hope and Healing.
Mm-hmm.
That is a mouthful, right? Yeah, so tell us about the Center for Hope and Healing and your work there.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you both. The Center for Hope and Healing is a 40-plus-year-old organization, nonprofit, that has always existed in Lowell, but we serve the greater Merrimack Valley. And our work is really to eradicate sexual violence. So we support survivors, we do prevention, education, we work with adults, youth, we work with men and boys, all towards the aim of, ending this thing we call sexual assault and sexual violence.
Nice.
Thank you for that work, because I think it's incredibly important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how long have you been doing the work here in Lowell?
I've been here in Lowell as the ED about six plus years, a little over 6 years. Before that, I worked in Boston. I worked in the state coalition. I've worked nationally. So I would say I've dedicated most of my career in life to anti-violence work in one form or another. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so admirable, and it must be tough work. It can be easy.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Well, it's rewarding, right? It's like,
Yeah.
Ending oppression is rewarding and necessary.
Yep.
And
The good fight.
that's right.
Yep.
We have no choice, right?
Yeah.
Especially as people of
Right.
color, especially as black folks, we have no choice but to work to end oppression and seek our own liberation. So,
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that I got tingles. Right
That's what we're doing.
Amplify that message right there.
Seriously.
and yet here we are with these smiles on our faces, right?
right.
Because that's important too, finding joy outside of the oppression and all of that, because it can be so heavy. Can I ask, this is kind of like a random question, but how do you take care of yourself when you're doing this work?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, joy is an act of resistance. So just as you're saying, smiling and being joyful in this work is an act of resistance. I love to laugh, I love to dance, listen to music, be outside, journal, but mostly music, dance, and some meditation and prayer.
Nice.
But some days it's just like, oh, help, and then that's the best I can get. But it's whatever, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being newer to Lowell, where do you find your blackness here? Especially coming from working in communities such as Salem and Boston.
Good question. So I identify as Afro-Latina, or as Black Puerto Rican. My father's Ethiopian, my mother's Puerto Rican. And so even that, finding people who identify similarly to myself is a challenge, right? But I definitely don't have a large Black community in Lowell. I see people randomly, one here or one there, or we've seen each other,
Right.
but I don't feel like I have a solid community. So that's why partly I was thrilled to the invitation to come and be with y'all, because I feel like there is a lack of community.
Yeah.
And especially, unfortunately, in the nonprofit sector, there aren't many Black folks in leadership of our nonprofits.
Yep.
So
I
that's
totally
another challenge.
agree.
That's another
Yeah.
challenge, yeah.
Yeah. I had spoken to one of your employees actually about how awesome it is to have a woman of color as their fearless leader. And I just want you to know she spoke extremely highly of you and the environment, because I think she had that moment too of, your nonprofit is extremely unique in Lowell to have so many different people of color on your staff and from different aspects. I feel like we talk about diversity, but the Center for Hope and Healing is truly diverse in many aspects. And I think, do you think having a leader of color really kind of informs the diversity, or makes a space more diverse, and that becomes like a maybe not a outside priority, but it is like important.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Representation matters. We can say what we want, but it does, right? And we all walk into, whether it's a doctor's office or a grocery store, and we scan the room for other people of color, other black folks. Okay, who kind of looks like me? So the place where I show up every day to work, 8, 9, 10 hours of my day, if no one around me looks like me, what does that feel like in the workplace, and what does that mean for my work, right?
Great question.
Yeah. And I frankly find it a little unethical for folks to work and lead in a community like Lowell without having representation of the community. It just feels unethical to me.
Say it loud.
Unethical. I just do. I said,
I really agree. Yeah.
Wholeheartedly, yes. And I play that game too. I call it a game now.
Yeah.
Like, everywhere I go.
Right?
And then you find that person like,
Or a head nod.
Yeah, exactly. I see you.
Right, exactly. Unfortunately, but true.
right.
So tell us a bit about why we're here today. We have something coming up that we wanted to speak about. Could you tell us about this?
Yes, thanks very much for asking. So we have been part of a larger coalition allyship with an organization called Freedom for All Massachusetts. And what this organization is doing is policy advocacy around a ballot question coming up in November. So there are 3 ballot questions. I can't even say I remember them all. I know one is about nurses, I should know this, but I probably don't at the moment. But question 3 is about a ballot initiative that asks voters to vote on whether we maintain an existing law or we undo basically that law. And that law is transgender protections for transgender citizens and residents in public spaces. Anyone in the community, public restrooms, gyms, movie theaters. So the law prohibits discrimination against transgender folks in those public settings. Schools, and it's been in effect since 2016. Guess what? No one has died.
Right.
No one's been hurt with additional protections from discrimination, right? And I think the opponents would say they're mounting an argument that unfortunately says that transgender folks are going to perpetrators are going to pretend to be transgender to go into restrooms and sexually assault folks. So that's one of the myths that the opposition is using.
Right.
So we as a sexual violence organization and others in our coalition, which is Jane Doe Inc., have come out strongly against that myth and sort of saying, you know what, it's actually the reverse. Transgender folks, particularly transgender women of color, specifically, even more specifically, black trans women, are the most highly assaulted group of people. Sexually, most highly, not just assaulted, but also murdered at incredibly high rates. So these are community members who are at risk of being harmed. They're not the perpetrators.
Right.
So we've been doing a lot of work to undo that myth and to ask folks, to support the ballot initiative, to say, yes, we want to maintain the existing law.
Right.
That's basically all it says.
And why, I don't understand why we would backpedal on that if we've already, I was like, when I saw it, the question was like, this must be something different. But it's not, but it's totally not.
It's like you're asking, so do we want to protect humans from being
That's right, harmed.
Yeah,
That's
right.
It's like, what?
And the humans that we've already established that we are going to protect, we're going to get rid of that.
That's
like,
right.
no,
We need to protect.
And they're worried about perpetrators. So folks who are not trans, who are pretending to be trans. So the problem is not trans folks, right? Like let's get to the deeper issue here.
Right.
Exactly.
I don't understand that in 2018 this is even up for debate.
Yeah, that's what many folks say. I agree. The governor has endorsed it. Most of the nonprofit organizations, kind of statewide, the WISE, again, the Anti-Violence Coalition, Jane Doe Inc. Folks exactly feel like, what is really the issue here? And that going backwards really does send a dangerous message. There's more danger for me in going back than in anything else, because it sends a really strong message to our transgender community members that you're not worth being safe in public spaces.
Right.
So that's why we've been supporting it. We've been doing canvassing, phone banking. It's a nonpartisan issue. It's not about one side or another.
Right.
It's not about any candidate. It's really about basic protections, basic human rights as I see them. So. Yeah,
Goodness. And I'm thinking even just about, like you said, this law was established in 2016. How many people came out freely and felt safe enough to be who they are and now are at even a higher risk, maybe?
Exactly.
Because of the
Exactly.
goodness gracious.
Well, you all have worked, with youth. You're youth folks, and we, are doing some youth work, especially with LGBTQ and T, queer youth. And it's terrifying for them. Just when I sort of hear and understand some of their stories and some of the experiences, literally young people not being able to go to the bathroom all day because their schools are not a safe place for them to go to the restroom. Right, and being, assaulted in restrooms or being, on the way to or from school, getting off and on the bus.
Right.
So you all know what it's hard enough, especially for young people of color, then to add this additional burden that, you may not make it from home to school safely and back. It's not acceptable.
Right.
Yeah.
What is a message we should pass along to the Black community that may be viewing?
Great question. I think the myth and the stereotype is that, and maybe we can have another show about this sometime, is that Black folks are not supportive of LGBTQ and T folks. And I would challenge that myth every time, or that belief every time I hear it come up. Number one, because I'm a Black gay person. Number two, because I've had conversations with folks in our communities that say, once they have an actual relationship with someone, then the stereotypes and the myths kind of go away, right? They're busted. They're just sort of like, yeah, I was holding on to that. I didn't really think it was true, but I was just sort of holding on to it. And I think it's just like that with this issue. If if anyone has never known someone who's transgender, it's going to be this scary thing, this unfamiliar thing. But once you have a relationship with someone, once you have a loved one, you can't love someone at the same time and stand up for violence against them and condone violence against them. It won't work.
And I think that's like true for so many things, right? It's like just the fear of not knowing, and then once you know, you're kind of like, oh, okay, I have some facts.
That's right. And we as Black folks know that, right? 'Cause there was one time in our history where folks were told our brains were smaller, we didn't have souls in our bodies, right?
What was it? 1/5 of
That's
man?
right, exactly. So we know that stereotypes and myths can be embedded in our culture, and that once they're revealed as myths and stereotypes and, non-facts, then we sort of move on. We know better, we do better,
Exactly. And I think a lot of it is to checking yourself. It's like, what do I really know?
There's that. I think that there are also folks that are more prone to checking themselves.
Yes, true.
Where other folks are allowed to, live a little more freely, and they don't really have to do that reflecting piece. Whereas I think that there's other groups that are constantly reflecting and being like, how can I do that better next time?
Absolutely.
I think I find myself as a Black woman constantly thinking about my own privileges, and I'm like, let's talk about that. Like, people always talk about white privilege and things like that, but it's like if you are, what is the term for it? A cisgender, heteronormative, and that all of those terms are just to say that you identify as the gender that you're born in.
You were assigned at birth, right?
Yes. And all of the things that go along, all of those like stereotypes really is what it is, that you actually have way more privileges than a lot of people who don't identify as that. And you have to really think about that. And what's your role in advocating for those people and being an ally? And it's like, okay, but here we are, right, as an oppressed group saying that this is how we are advocates and allies, and this is how I'm checking my privilege. But we need everybody to do that.
That's right, exactly. Absolutely, totally.
Yeah.
So that's yes on 3. Just want to encourage all your wonderful listeners and viewers to vote yes on 3. Again, it's a simple matter of maintaining what's already in law, which is protections for transgender folks in public spaces, so you can feel free. You know, some of us, me not as much as I should, but go to the gym and do live our lives without even thinking.
Right.
You know, I was in a meeting with someone recently that was like, we were flying, right? It was out of state meeting, we were flying, and she said to the group gathered, she's like, you know, I bet you all are thinking, I have my documents, I have my ticket, I just go, and I'm, you know, sometimes you might be worried about being stopped more than others, but she's like, I know that routinely I am going to not only be stopped, I'm going to be physically searched, I'm going to be taken to another room and potentially asked to display my genitals.
Wow.
Right? So this is the level of scrutiny that a transgender person has to experience every single time they fly.
Wow.
Talk about privilege.
Yeah.
My mouth was just like yours. Like,
Right.
every time? She was like, yeah,
my
every
goodness.
single time, right? It's pat searches, it's really, you know, so I'm like, yeah, I would not be flying. I'd be
Right,
getting
yeah.
in my car and driving cross country because that's a lot of trauma.
That is.
And that's a cisgender privilege. I don't even think about it twice, right? And that my documents match, you know, my presentation.
Right.
Right? My ID, my driver's license. If they don't, if it's a different name, if it's a different gender marker, what impact does that have on my ability to travel in the world? So all we're saying in Yes on 3 is that everyone deserves the right to travel freely as they're, you know, as they're able to.
Like, can we just let humans be humans and not be all up in every, like, I just feel like that's such a violation. And how are folks supposed to feel safe in this world while there are people who are cisgender, who are out here committing heinous crimes?
Absolutely.
But, and even like just the idea of that pat down, like that extreme search, it just makes me feel like, is that really necessary?
Right, of course
Like,
not.
I mean, well, they've been continue to police bodies, right? And what you can and can't do with your body.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's really unfortunate.
Absolutely.
So, Yes on 3, y'all.
Yes.
on
Yes.
three.
Yes.
Ooh, I'm
Thank
getting
you.
hot just
All right.
Like, wow.
That's
Yeah.
right. So we're doing a couple of things between now and then. Every Thursday night between now and election night, we're doing phone banking, which is basically just calling folks, telling them about our experience, telling them about, you know, the work around Yes on 3. It's just making calls. And then on Sundays, we've been doing canvassing, which is folks going out in the community and really talking about, you know, the ballot question. So if you want to get involved, find us on our website, on our Facebook page, and, you know, jump in.
And it's really easy to find.
Right, and I was going to say, and it's Center for Hope and Healing.
That's right.
So you all know where you're looking.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Wow. And I think you did a really good job of talking how it directly impacts folks of color and specifically the Black community. But let's shift this a little bit. Let's talk about your Black experience and specifically in Lowell. And how has that been for you? Because you just recently moved here. You've been working here for 6 years, you said, right? But how, and Masada had briefly mentioned coming from like a place like Boston, working in Boston, where you do see folks of color all the time everywhere. How is that for you here? And what is it? Just tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the experience of both being invisible and hyper visible at the same time, right? That we have as Black women, right?
Whoa.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? So not being really seen and being in many, many rooms, especially as an executive director where I'm the only person of color, the only Black woman. And right, what does it mean when you raise your hand and say something and get ignored and someone else 2 seats down raises their hand and says the same thing? And like, great idea. So that experience of being invisible in multiple spaces with my peers and colleagues, and then also being hyper visible, right? Yo, won't you come speak at my event? You didn't talk to me all year long. Now you want me to brown your event up? Just say it, right? So. You know, that hypervisibility or being, you know, seen a lot in the community and being, you know, called out for this, that, or the other, and without genuine relationship. I'm like, yeah, I get it. I'm one of very few Black women you're going to see walking through here. I get it. So you're going to recognize me, but that doesn't give you the right to X, Y, or Z.
Right.
So it's that, you know, invisible that, like you said earlier, our bodies are almost commodities, right? Invisible when you want us to be,
Right.
and hyper visible when you wanna,
Right,
you know,
right.
make us visible. So that's a challenge, you know, to feel like you have your own agency and your own right to your own space and
Right.
body. Like there are some days on the weekend I don't feel like walking through Lowell talking to nobody. The hood is up. I'm going to get my coffee or my whatever. No, you
Yes,
probably experience that
oh,
way more
certainly,
than I
certainly.
do. Born
There's
and
sometimes
raised
I'm like,
here.
nope, not doing that on the weekend. Not doing that on the weekend.
No, I'm not who you think
Yeah.
I am.
Just even
Not
walking
today.
here, we were walking to so many people. Hi, oh, hi,
Hi,
hi.
and like like it was like a 2-minute walk, and we were like, hi.
Exactly.
Maritza's like, I feel like Mr. Rogers.
Beautiful day. Exactly.
But that
So,
same
yeah,
kind
you
of
know that.
when they want
Yes,
it to be
that's
beautiful.
right,
Because
exactly.
I have met folks in like community events where, oh, it's so nice to meet you, that hypervisibility. See me on the street though.
Yeah.
What is my hair different? You don't recognize me?
That's been my experience for
Exactly.
forever. It's like, oh, my hair's in a ponytail.
Different person.
Right.
Or that's the only topic of conversation
Yeah.
that folks have.
Right.
It's
That's
like, oh,
right.
you changed your hair.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Oh, nice, right?
Well,
I didn't
actually also
recognize
have a
you.
brain underneath. all
Right,
this.
exactly.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I think how it translates into our work in the nonprofit sector is a similar experience, right? That our work gets marginalized, and our staff gets marginalized, and our you know, our approach. We have a different way of working.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, our organization works in different ways. How we approach working with youth, with adults, with men, right, is different.
Yep,
The way a
totally.
mainstream organization would do it. All right, so, you know, sometimes it looks nice and oh, isn't that great? But then there's, well, is that really evidence based, or is that right? So it has its challenges along those lines too.
Or minimizing of experiences.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
maybe that's just all in your head.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Do you ever feel like you have to be like the voice of blackness? Like, this is the black experience for everyone.
You're such,
Or-
you're such an expert, Isa. Tell us more.
So articulate.
Yes.
That's my favorite compliment. Like, insult.
Never.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, did you not expect that I could
Right,
do
exactly.
this? I
Absolutely.
speak in full
Hey,
sentences.
I read books.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't want that for my team. I don't want that for the folks we work
Right.
with, right? And if we didn't have it and see those models growing up, I want them to have it,
Right.
right? So that they see us and that they see the people we work with as models
Yep.
that's
Right.
of something different. So,
Yeah. I think for me, sometimes in nonprofit work, I always feel like I feel heavy, this heavy obligation. And I feel like, well, if I'm not doing this, no one will. And I have to do this work, and I have to be that representative, and I have to, you know, speak in this way and make everybody laugh. And I can never have a day where I'm like, because I'm angry.
Right.
or,
What's
wrong with you? Yeah. Yes. Do you ever feel like that? Like, I mean, I feel like it's a little bit different with your team, like because
Right.
you have that diverse
Right.
staff.
That's right.
But do you ever feel that heaviness, that weight of the
absolutely,
obligation?
absolutely. And I feel like, you know, the cost of oppression to us is a disconnection from who we are in an indigenous sense, our sense of spirit, our sense of joy, our sense of family and community. So that constant oppression disconnects us increasingly from our power, from our sense of self. So we do a lot of work, at least internally with my team, around what does it mean to reconnect to self? What does it mean to reconnect to spirit? What does it mean to reconnect to our indigenous practices and our, you know, communities? Because that's where our power lies. You know, that's where our power lies.
That for some reason that reminds me of this poem from this poet Maida Devale, and one of her lines that just to this day just like stayed with me is, "Grandma, who did you pray to before someone told you who your God should be?" Ooh,
That one
that right? That line alone, I was like, oh my gosh, that's like so deep, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm
Exactly.
like, can we just sit with that for a
Right. I know. It's like that just reminded me of that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
because I always just think, I just like to think of that sometimes. It's like, before someone told us this is what you should be, what were we meant to be like?
Right.
I love it. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you for that one. That
Yes,
one really got me.
yes. Thank you. What's her name? Maida Devale.
Maida Devale.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
great. Yeah,
Yes.
that's wonderful.
Oh, wow.
You can't recover after that one. It's like, whoa. Mine.
Yeah, really. So you said that you identify as Afro-Latina. So how is that for you? Because I too, at one time in my life, I identified as Afro-Latina. And then I realized, well, I don't know if I feel Puerto Rican enough to be able to claim that identity. And I like Black because it's just, for me, it's just overarching and it is who I am. I'm melanated and I feel Black empowers me for me. But when I am around Latinas, I don't always feel like I can always be Black or I'm definitely not Puerto Rican enough. You know, I don't speak enough Spanish.
I am. Yep.
So how is that for you?
That's real. I mean, you're telling my story there. Growing up, you know, even though I lived in a household that was very Black and very African, my father was born and raised in Ethiopia, so it's not like we were several generations removed. We were African and we were Puerto Rican, and we were very Puerto Rican. But growing up, my experience was I spoke too much Spanish for my Black folks, and I said, right, and I was too Black for the Latinos. They're like, your hair though, you're summertime, you're a little dark though, you're negrita, and so it was this experience of never quite being enough in each. And so I also do call myself Black Boricua, identify as Black for that reason, politically, emotionally, powerfully. I feel like, you know, people of the diaspora, like that's who we are, right? And, you know, my mother's no longer living, and there's a piece of me that doesn't want to also lose that part of my identity either. And it's like, you don't get to define me for me.
Absolutely.
You don't get to tell me who my identity is, right?
So that it feels comfortable for you, so you can make sense of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it hard? Because I don't think that a lot of people identify as Afro-Latinx in Lowell. At least in
now we got a community going now. That's it.
Las mujeres tienen poder.
See?
My little bit of Spanish.
That was loud. That's it. There we go. That's it.
I can't stand it. But also, I can imagine that that's difficult to navigate.
Yep. But I know when people look at me, what they see is a Black woman, and I'm okay with that. I am okay with that, right? I know how I define myself in community with my loved ones, with my circle, my community. But I am fine. I am a Black woman, and I am not twisted about that. That is not unclear to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Isa, thank you so much for sharing. First, like, organizationally what you do, and I'd like to think of it as globally. I think leading this charge on Yes on 3 is a global issue. So thank you for that work as well. Yes on 3, and thank you for sharing such personal, intimate stories with us.
Thank you. We got real.
Right. Lean in. Thank you. And let's not forget that it is Center for Hope and Healing, which you can find online and on Facebook, was it?
Absolutely. You can find us on Facebook too. Thank you for your wonderful work and what you're doing in Lowell, building community. It is life-saving and transformative, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being part of our community, and I'm so looking forward to more things
Yes.
together.
Yes, definitely.
And thank you, viewers, for tuning in to Kindred Conversations, Living Black and Lowell.
Bye. Mind, body, and soul was a plan when you have no goal. Was a dream when your gray matter really takes toll. Like a feet when your shoes when you have no soles. Rocks to gold, riches no soul. Yeah, told myself.